So before we get into this video, let's talk about what we're going to see in this video. It's called a war crime. It's called apartheid. The perpetrator commits against one or more persons an act that is a proscribed inhumane act or is of a nature or gravity similar to any proscribed inhumane act. Crime against humanity. Apartheid. The perpetrator commits against one or more persons an act that is a proscribed inhumane act as defined by the dictionary, or any act that is of a nature and gravity similar to any such proscribed inhumane act. Now, apartheid is using a minority population against the rest of the population. The Aborigine are citizens of the Constitution and cannot be treated with. They became citizens to the contract in 1967. If they want their sovereignty, they must give up their citizenship and go back to their country and form some sort of statehood before they can come back and make treaty with our people. This is an act of apartheid. It's very clear what this government has done, and it could be considered a crime against humanity. The rest of the country. The rest of the country. So as we get into this video, I want you to keep these two crimes in mind, because Marine Faruqi has committed this offence in her own words, speaking against the very people of this country that forged this country out of 102,000 soldiers' deaths. Marine Faruqi is shitting all over your Anzac, and she knows it. So let's get into this video. Pauline, I warned you, didn't I? And you went and did something silly and got charged for it, and now it's going to cost you what? Half your home? Half your home. Because you used your ego instead of your intelligence. I gave you evidence of a crime, Pauline, and I'm going to point out very clearly that I can show acts of treason or treachery by Adam Bandt, other members of the parliament that have said the same things to Adam Bandt. Now, Faruqi deserves to be charged under Section 44 of the Constitution, Pauline. Section 42 saw an obligation in her to uphold the Constitution. And since she's been in that office, she's done nothing but try to treaty with citizens. Try to treaty with citizens. A legal impossibility, Pauline. A legal impossibility. Now, I've also been speaking to Aborigine people across the country, Pauline, and you don't serve them. You don't represent them at all. A lot of them are actually very pissed off with all of this Lydia activism and all of this undermining of the parliament in their name. In their name. Because of trollops like Lydia. Because of paid activists like Lydia. Now, we could laugh at Lydia and her attempts to sit down with King Charles, but Lydia's ignorant of 200 years of law, isn't she? Lydia's totally ignorant of 200 years of law while she walks around with a dead dog on her back. While she walks around with a dead dog on her back. And I say that because that woman in London said that. And that's the impression you're giving the wider world while your communist masters tell you what to do. Now, it's an act of treason to go against your oath. You took an oath to sit in that parliament, Pauline. It was very clearly pointed out to you that people were going outside of their oath and following allegiances to foreign powers, therefore negating Section 42 and Section 44. Section 44.1, Section 44.2, Section 44.4, Section 44.5. We already discussed this. Why haven't you charged her? Why did you get on Twitter and defame her? She has every right to live in this country. She has every right to be a politician, as long as she adheres to the Constitution she took an oath to. You can't treaty with citizens, and you're not treatying with Aboriginal tribal peoples who have their sovereignty before you invaded this country in 1967. So this Faruqi woman abusing a colonial past is disregarding 102,000 soldiers that spilt blood on battlefields so she could sit there and undermine those 102,000 men on behalf of a delusion called First Nations. Now, please explain to me what a nation technically is, Pauline. I would really like to see an international map that defines one of those nations on it. To be a nation is to be in agreement with all the other nations. So show me a map with one of these nations on it. You can't, because they were nomadic people. They were nomadic people in tribes with tribal elders and chiefs. And you've manipulated this situation on behalf of communist money masters to undermine the Constitution at the expense of that tribal sovereignty and our Constitution that doesn't belong to you, doesn't belong to an administrator. And as I said before, it doesn't matter if you bankrupt that Constitution, God, King and country. And we anchored that and defined it on the Supreme Court record and defined what that naked owner was, while you operated in Office of Administration in the Hague Conventions. Because of all of this, I now have military men by my side, listening to me, acknowledging the lineage in their Anzac. I now have a military police officer listening and going through all my videos, which demonstrate to have proven that you have committed international war crimes while in Office of Administration. You have committed some of the gravest offences known to mankind. So as I grow these military men to know where they came from, what they serve, who they are, do you think they're going to disrespect 102,000 soldiers that laid down their lives before them? Or are you just going to brain train all these kids into serving the government of the day and then sending them off to the Ukraine to be death fodder so you can remove them from our Constitution? From our Constitution. They serve what is foreign under a foreign oath to what is the Constitution. So the time comes, Pauline, for you to acknowledge and charge these people for undermining the Constitution. Oh, you can't. Why did they jail you all those years ago? Did you figure out that this was an administrator under Hague and Geneva Conventions, locked into over 10,000 United Nations pacts and treaties? Oh, really? Right, okay. So you're not the people of the Commonwealth, are you? While you sit there and accuse the people of the Commonwealth for being colonialists. You occupied their crown and then call them colonialists when you're the Zionists that did that to them. 75 years of peacekeeping. So we could accuse Marine Faruqi of lying to the Parliament. Lying to the Parliament. Is that a crime, Pauline, to lie to the Parliament? Should you have picked her up on her lies instead of abusing her and telling her to go back where she came from? To go back where she came from. It's a pretty disgusting thing to say. Your tweet was like 90% correct, and you should have stopped before you said, go back where you came from. Because you are 100% correct until you vilified the woman. Until you vilified the woman. When you had the upper hand to go and accuse her of being in treason to her oath. In treason to her oath. Forget about what you administer for a minute. You still took an oath to join that parliament, and then you went against it. Didn't you, Lydia? Didn't you, Adam Bant? Didn't you, Greens? Didn't you, Albanese? To try and referendum the people away from their constitution, which is held in God, King and Country. So if a sovereign stood up and said, oi, what are you doing with our constitution? And the engineer's case said, if we brought up the Crown, you'd be obligated to deal with that problem. Where do we go from here, Pauline? Do you just walk all over Australians, take everything that's theirs, kick them into the gutter, use a minority population for your monetary gain, and move in with all your mining infrastructure? Looks like they're doing that in the USA as well, burning down lots of forests to open up the ground for that mining. It's very evident, Pauline, that we're under a military attack on the front line, and you're not addressing this in an intellectual way. That's a problem. Might be that you're ignorant of certain things. I don't think so, given that they put you in jail and you came out and beat that. You should be proud of that, Pauline. You should bring that past back up and demonstrate to everyone why they jailed you. This has become a crux point to everyone, because now I have a growing army of veterans that see what you've done, and they will eventually speak up for what you've done, right? And when that starts to grow across the country, and you have problems in foreign battlefields that we have no need to serve, that we have no interest in serving, because the ones that occupy our country have that interest, driving the world into World War III for your forced industrial revolution. Now, I've laid out everything before a military police officer who cannot deny what I have said. He is now obligated to go and do something about it. Obligated, Pauline. Obligated. I've spoken to RSMs, warrant officers, assault pioneers, 1 RAR, 3 RAR, 6 RAR, and so on. Okay? You seem to think that this is a law-tard game, that all these, and I will point this out quickly to all those listening. If you're joining private member associations to law-tard, you're making the people that run those associations wealthy. $10 a month times 500 people is enough money for them to live a very extravagant life at all of your expense, selling you all this American pseudo-legal garbage that they are now being monitored for. They have been informed to the Australian Federal Police that this continues to happen instead of standing up for the loyalty of that Constitution. You all want to run away from it while that government dismantles it on you, demonstrating that you really have no loyalty for your country while you try and undermine everyone else for a profit. Now, I'm not going to name names here, but there are quite a few people that have taken what work I laid down on the table for your benefit and have taken it for their own gain. their own profitory gain, right? I've always said to you, take this information for free. If you believe I've helped you in any way, shape or form, your donations help. They support us to go and charge these people with war crimes. Okay? We need the money to do that. We don't need the money to run a private members association where we profit from you just for the sheer fact that we can sell you American pseudo-legal garbage law, which you keep failing with in the courtrooms. And at some point, these people that run these groups are criminally responsible for teaching you how to get in shit in those courtrooms. If all of you started to gather together and acknowledge that the information that you were given caused you harm, those people that have been known to be doing this for a long time are actually criminally liable, very, very harshly liable, for selling you those lies that got you in that trouble in the first place. And they should start to realise this now as we move forward with real military men that recognise the foundations that were laid down by their Anzac and the attack on that is being carried out by this Australian government as we speak. Wah, 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 colonial past. No, those Anzac went off to battle with 2,500 Aborigine to defend this continent so that we could live on it in freedom. And until 1967, those Aboriginal tribes were quite wealthy and lived independent from the Constitution. They were not to be counted because they were their own peoples. Captain Sterling, in his own letters, defined very clearly not to interfere with the natives. Not to interfere with the natives. Why do you interfere with them? Why are you trying to treaty with the people that take Centrelink for 40 years? At whose expense, Pauline? Did we pay them to undermine our country? Did the Greens give away Australian money to undermine the Constitution into a republic so that your sons would serve the government of the day at the government's bidding in places like the Ukraine instead of serving God, kingdom and country, their families and their cities first? Them as people first? Or do you want to turn them into servants of the government when the government is technically at law our public service? Our public service. Do you work for that public service, Pauline? Is it a crime to undermine your office, Pauline? Is Faruqi undermining her office, Pauline? Of course she is. She's desecrating the very oath that she took, right? And as administrators, aren't you obligated to follow the Constitution that you keep trying to undermine? Might be why you're trying to undermine it. Well, I hold it now, anchored with God, shown to all these military members across the country, bringing people like warrant officers and military police to my doorstep to find out what I've done, to find out what I've shown others, to define whether I'm lying or not. And it's very clear that I'm not, because now those military members are willing to go and talk to those military police. You have committed some serious international offences while in that parliament, trying to undermine this country, allowing members like Faruqi to say those things on Twitter, on the parliamentary floor, without charging them for doing so, without reprimanding them for going outside of the Constitution They took an oath too. They took an oath too. So if all these RSLs recognise and take an oath to that Constitution, are you shitting on 110,000, 102,000 dead soldiers? Soldiers that sacrificed their lives over the last 100 years so you could sit there in that parliament and be the cretins that you are? Are they rolling in their graves right now? You had Ben Roberts-Smith warn everyone not to join the Defence Force. You put DEI into the Defence Force. You told the people of the Defence Force that they can't do politics and they must serve the government of the day. That means they no longer serve their land. That means they no longer serve their families. That means they no longer serve above you, who appointed you as public servants, according to the Engineers Case 1920. You're obligated to talk about this Crown situation. You're obligated to recognise the people united in a federal commonwealth. And they were. They were there with all those red standards. We'll stop calling them ensigns because their land flags and ensigns only appear on ships, Pauline. They only appear on admiralty that forms national governments, when the federal capacity of deprivate stood over and above that public service. So we need to address this very clearly, Pauline, as all of these veterans start to realise, why Ben Roberts-Smith was hung out to dry and your command line responsibility excused itself from some serious war crimes across foreign battlefields, right? You excuse yourselves. And then you come out, Mark Butler needs to be charged and will be charged after all the information is provided to the military police. The civilians will charge him in a federal court, Pauline, for doing a war crime in relation to the lockdowns. Now, the Victorian Health Minister has come out scrambling after Daniel Andrews was finally dobbed in. Very well done for the minister in the parliament that used his parliamentary privilege to bring that phone call into the parliament, putting Daniel Andrews into disrepute. But I'm going to point out something very clearly to you here, Pauline, that links all of this together. Someone in command line responsibility covered that up while you were going through a lockdown process, while you were pushing a poison on everyone. And then the Victorian Health Minister comes out realising he's committed a war crime and starts to backtrack on it like it's a corporate mistake. It's not a corporate mistake, Pauline. It's an international offence that occurred on country, right? International and non-international means domestic terrorism by the government, by forced medical procedure. Torture, right? The torture is the vile speak that came out of all your mouths. Remember when Jackie Lambie said, "You'll be on the back foot, we'll chase you all down"? Was that a threat? Was that a threat on the front line, was it? From a military force that took over our country and put us on the front line of a battlefield as front line responders. So you disregard the emergency services in the police by forced medical procedure. You disregard the Defence Force and put them on the front line with forced medical procedure. We've given you evidence of the nurse, a military nurse and a military doctor that authorised the use of a poison to poison the Australian Defence Force. Now, if you're an Australian Defence Force member and you believe you've been injured or harmed by the Defence Force, please report that to us. Please get in contact with us, because this is a serious Nuremberg-style offence that has been committed by Anthony Albanese's government and Scott Morrison's government on behalf of a command line responsibility that swept Daniel Andrews' attempted murder under the rug. Attempted murder because I heard this. Now, this is just alleged, but Daniel Andrews drove up the street to the house he was going to, emptied out his vehicle into the house before returning back to the scene and making that phone call, giving the time frame that it took for him to make that phone call legitimacy. I would hazard a guess this man had a car full of alcohol and was going to some sort of barbecue, some sort of event at a private house, and he hit that kid by coming across the lanes into that street without looking, because he thought, I'm the Premier, I'm above the law. Well, he should be jailed now, Pauline, for attempted murder, for leaving that crime scene and having people cover it up for him. His wife should be wholly liable for sitting in the car and knowing what happened and allowing it to be covered up. The people that covered it up, Pauline, are that command line responsibility that force medically procedured everyone. And this would have been a big disgrace. Just like those 28 pedophiles that if we found out who they were, we'd trust you not at all. We would have no faith in our High Court if we found out that our High Court judges had actually kitty fiddled. We would have no faith in the Parliament if we found out that our Prime Minister in the past had kitty fiddled. We would have no faith in the judicial system or the Constitution if it was found out who they were in that Parliament. Now, Lydia came out and went, ooh, he touched me, right? We know that you have those dirty little parties in the Parliament in the middle of the night. We've seen you go there. It should be very evident to the people that some real filth are in your Parliament. It should be evident to the people that some real criminals run your magistrates' court. It should be evident to the people that some real filth oversee those criminals from higher up and allow them to get away with it. Allow them to get away with it. Take those names, hide them under the carpet instead of charging them and seeing them go to jail for their criminal offences. That's what you are, Pauline. All of you, over and over and over again, using this manipulation to undermine your own country that you serve. Your own country that you serve. Marine Faruqi has no respect for the office that she sits in. She has no idea why Anzac spilled their life, and she has no idea that a foreign crown came in and occupied that in 75 years of peacekeeping. And you're calling 62,000 men that spilt their lives to defend you, colonialists. You all need to pull your heads in that Parliament, because these soldiers around me are absolutely disgusted in you. They're the ones that will speak up about all of this. They will impress upon the youth that follow in their footsteps that this government of the day has no interest in them and will use them as fodder. Fodder! Real world fodder to go and die for useless things in useless battlefields, because those things don't stand for this true Commonwealth of Australia. It's called the Vale of Siddim in the Bible. If you don't stand up who you are on that stone in remembrance of the lineage of your forefathers, you get swept under holy seas. And we won't let that sink under holy seas, Pauline. We recognise the earth. We recognise the heavens. We recognise the 24-hour map that it gave us. We recognise so many things, Pauline, that we are willing to stand up in the High Court and speak for over and above you bunch of criminals in that Parliament. Both of you, because you vilified that woman, Pauline, and she desecrated her oath to that Constitution. And instead of charging her for what she did, you defamed her character instead, making you equally as bad as her. You dropped down to her level. Bunch of children in there, aren't you? Bunch of children not knowing what you're doing. Very evident by Mark Butler now coming out and speaking about his failures as a health minister while he committed war crimes against Australians in numbers. 20 million all across Australia got forced medically procedured by you lot in torture. You tortured them. You threatened them not to have jobs. You told their employers to enforce this through your DEI investors, your stakeholders that don't have a right to what is God's. They don't have a right to what is God's. Because you privatised it all to them, Pauline. You privatised everything to them, Pauline. So you made the biggest mistake you could have possibly made. You were given so much information over the last 4 years. And you went and did that, making you drop to the bottom of the gutter along with the rest of them, when you could have held your head high and physically charged them in a federal court for their crimes against the Constitution. Now, after listening to that, and the fact that we have talked about the police human trafficking people in this country, we talk about the federal government's complicity in these actions through the command line responsibility into those states. 268.10, Crime Against Humanity, Enslavement. The perpetrator exercises any or all of the powers attaching the right of ownership over one or more persons, including the exercise of power in the course of trafficking in persons, particularly women and children. They do this via a driver's license that they call a privilege instead of a competency that demonstrates you're competent to use machinery on the roads in front of everyone else. It became a privilege or enslavement where they issue you traffic notices going against 268.10 of the Criminal Code 1995. We can look at a deprivation of liberty or imprisonment, a severe deprivation of physical liberty, perpetrated by these members of the Parliament that speak all this nonsense about trying to tear your country apart while they attack you on the front lines with what we forementioned in the human trafficking. If you don't follow the bidding of these people, they lock you up and deprive you of your liberty in a human trafficking offence. The guilty party locks you up instead of the law locking them up. Now, persecution by the Australian government, denying the people a right of self-determination and denying rights under certain articles of the Covenant. So we can see here a perpetrator severely deprives one or more persons of any of the rights referred to in paragraph B. The rights are those guaranteed in Article 6, 7, 8, 9, paragraph 2 of Article 14, Article 18, paragraph 2 of Article 20, paragraph 2 of Article 23, and Article 27 of the Covenant. So we see here that this Australian government ignores all of its obligations to the Criminal Code and those Hague Conventions by spouting all of this stuff out in the Parliament. We can already define Marine Faruqi to have breached the Constitution. So let's quickly have a look at that before we close off. Now, we can see that Marine Faruqi took an oath or an affirmation of allegiance. Every senator and every member of the House of Representatives shall, before taking his seat or her seat, make and subscribe before the Governor-General or some person authorised by him, usually the Chief Justice, an oath or affirmation of allegiance in the form set forth in the schedule to this Constitution. This then makes them obligated to the Constitution at every letter of the law here. So let's have a look at that letter of the law here. How can a citizen treaty with its own government? How can they be First Nations if they never appeared on another nation's map? These are all very credible things to state, while people like Marine Faruqi disobey the very oath she took to sit in that Parliament at which she became obligated to this Constitution. Any person who is under acknowledgement of allegiance, obedience, or adherence to a foreign power, or is a subject or a citizen or entitled to the rights or privileges of a subject or a citizen of a foreign power, of a foreign power, of a foreign power. 4. Holds any office of profit under the Crown or any pension payable during the pleasure of the Crown out of any revenues of the Commonwealth. They all get paid to be senators and House of Representatives. They profit in their office under the Crown by being paid to sit in that office to be obligated to this Constitution. It would be a direct act of treason, according to King via Casement, to attempt to undermine the blessing of Almighty God defined in this very Constitution, therefore defining an allegiance, therefore recognising obedience or adherence to a foreign power. Now, if you're constantly trying to berate the very thing you took an oath to, you are obviously in allegiance to something foreign. Let's have a look at Marine Faruqi's words. So as we close off, I want you to think about what treason to your oath actually is. Condolences to those who knew the Queen. I cannot mourn the leader I took oath to, of a racist empire I work for, built on stolen lives I administer under Centrelink, the land and wealth of colonised peoples. So what did those Anzac actually die for, Marine Faruqi? We are reminded of the urgency of treaty with citizens we call First Nations because we as administrators attempt to undermine the very Constitution, justice and reparations for British colonies and becoming a republic. Well, we became a sovereign nation at the Treaty of Versailles 1919, leading to Imperial Conferences 1926. That's hardly colonialism when men on the land here defended the land in their own name, in their own name. You are desecrating Royal Australian soldiers, not Royal United Kingdom soldiers, not Royal Great British soldiers, not soldiers of Scotland, not soldiers of England, Royal Australian regiments. So we can see here that Pauline's mistake was the very last sentence. She lowered herself to the scum that the rest of them are. Your attitude appalls and disgusts me. When you immigrated to Australia, she did. You took every advantage of this country, she did. You took citizenship, she did, making her obligated to certain things that are in her job role. She bought multiple homes while all of you can't even afford your first home, and she got a job in Parliament. It's clear you're not happy. That's where Pauline should have stopped. Pauline lowered herself into the gutter after that. I'm not interested in letters from the Queen unless they contain an apology for the trail of destruction inflicted by British colonialism and a commitment to reparations. Marine Faruqi has failed to realise that our Constitution was occupied in 1967 and a Great Seal was smashed and a new Great Seal, which she operates under, was forged in 1973, demonstrating to be different to what we are. She works for something that is not what was founded here, and she's abusing what was founded here in a bid to dismantle it, therefore going against Section 44(1) of the Constitution. One colonial government supporting another. What a disgrace. No, Marine Faruqi. One peacekeeping force that entered this constitution in 1967, working with other countries that had also occupied in a peacekeeping mission for the collection of debts under the Recovery of Debts, 1939. This leads to a whole bunch of international laws that see all of you committing war crimes while you attempt to dismantle something that is not colonial and is Anzac, that was occupied by peacekeeping forces, taking away the ability from the military to declare war while it was in peacekeeping mode for Zionists and other powers and other powers and other powers. Section 44(1) of the Constitution. Are you in adherence to or allegiance to a foreign power not in lineage of your Anzac? You work for that colonial peacekeeping force, Marine Faruqi. You took an oath to that peacekeeping force, Marine Faruqi. You work for the United Nations that are in our government, trying to dismantle it away from 102,000 souls that spilt blood on battlefields, so you could sit in our parliament and desecrate our dead. What a disgrace. And the same could be said of Albanese, the same could be said of Adam Bant, the same could be said of a lot of you in that parliament who show support for powers outside of that constitution. Pauline, you did that yourself by wearing a scarf in our parliament, not a Zionist parliament. You can start to see how corrupt these people are. You can start to see what their modus operandi is, and you can see that foreigners are attempting to undermine your constitution, Section 44(1). You've got people under oath going against Section 42, their very own oath, which could only mean that they are attainted with a foreign interest, going against Section 44(1). Now, Pauline, you were told to charge these people. You were told to involve the Australian Federal Police, and you were told to involve the military.